The galaxy had known peace for 3,000 years before the Velcrin arrived. They came from the dark spaces between spiral arms, a species that had evolved in the crushing gravity of a world orbiting a dying star. Their ships were biological nightmares, grown rather than built, and their weapons dissolved matter at the molecular level. Within 6 months of their arrival, they had conquered 47 star systems and enslaved 12 different species. The Galactic Council met in emergency session on the crystal spires of Athenor Prime. Representatives from 200 civilized worlds gathered to discuss the threat. The Velcrin had made their intentions clear through the screaming broadcasts they transmitted from conquered worlds. They sought to consume all biological matter in the galaxy, converting it into fuel for their ever-expanding hive ships. Ambassador Teleth of the Korean Commonwealth stood before the assembly, his 4 arms gesturing in patterns of distress. "We have lost contact with 3 more colonies in the Outer Rim. The Velcrin fleet grows larger with each world they take. Our combined military forces have engaged them 7 times. 7 times we have been defeated." The council chamber fell silent. The Koreans were known as the greatest warriors in the galaxy, their military tradition spanning millennia. If they could not stop the Velcrin, what hope did anyone else have? "There is one species we have not yet contacted," spoke Elder Vrix, a being of pure energy contained within a crystalline matrix. "The humans of Earth. They joined the galactic community only 50 years ago. We dismissed them as primitive, but perhaps we were hasty." A wave of skepticism rippled through the chamber. Humanity was young, barely past their first interstellar ventures. They had no great weapons, no ancient military traditions. They had fought among themselves for most of their history, unable to unite even their own species until the discovery of faster-than-light travel. "The humans?" Teleth's translator struggled to convey his disbelief. "They have 12 colony worlds and a defense fleet of perhaps 300 ships. The Velcrin have consumed entire civilizations 10 times their size. But desperation makes allies of unlikely partners." The vote was called, and by a narrow margin the council agreed to request human assistance. An envoy ship was dispatched to Earth with a message. The galaxy needed help, and time was running out. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UNS Defiance, reading the council's transmission for the 3rd time. Around her, the bridge crew maintained their stations with practiced efficiency, but she could feel the tension in the air. Every human who had seen the footage of Velcrin attacks understood what they were facing. "How long until the fleet is assembled?" she asked her first officer. Commander James Wilson checked his display. 48 hours. Every military vessel we have is being recalled. The civilian government has authorized full mobilization." Sarah nodded slowly. Humanity had spent the last 50 years exploring, colonizing, and yes, preparing. They had learned from the other species in the galaxy, studied their technologies and their histories, but they had also kept something to themselves, something that made the other species uncomfortable when they noticed it. Humans were predators, not in the casual sense that many species use the term, but true apex predators from a death world that had tried to kill them at every turn of their evolution. Earth was a nightmare planet by galactic standards, with extreme temperature variations, unstable weather patterns, and an ecosystem that had spent billions of years in an evolutionary arms race. Humanity had climbed to the top of that food chain through persistence, pack tactics, and a refusal to accept defeat. The Galactic Council was about to learn what that meant. 2 weeks later, the combined fleet gathered at Rally Point Sigma, a strategically positioned asteroid field near the border of Velcrin-controlled space. 500 Galactic Council ships of various designs hung in formation, their weapons arrays powered down while they waited. The human fleet arrived last, and their entrance made the alien commanders take notice. 300 human ships might seem like a small number compared to the Council fleet, but they moved with a precision that spoke of countless hours of coordinated training. More importantly, they were bristling with weapons. While other species had focused on shields and energy efficiency, humans had dedicated themselves to finding better ways to kill things. Admiral David Park commanded the human fleet from the UNS Indomitable, a carrier-class vessel that served as a mobile command center. He opened a channel to all ships, human and alien alike. "I've reviewed the tactical data from previous engagements with the Velcrin." His voice carried calm authority. "You've been fighting them the way you fight each other. Energy weapons, precision strikes, attempts at diplomatic solutions. The Velcrin don't care about any of that. They're not here to conquer, they're here to consume." On dozens of alien bridges, commanders listened with varying degrees of attention. Some were offended by the implied criticism. Others were curious about what this young species might offer. "We're going to show you a different way to fight," Admiral Park continued. "A human way. We're going to be aggressive, unpredictable, and absolutely relentless. The Velcrin are about to learn why Earth's history is written in blood." The transmission ended, and the fleet began its approach to the first contested system. Intelligence reports indicated a Velcrin harvesting operation was underway on the colony world of Thraxis 4. 3 hive ships had been detected in orbit, processing the planet's biosphere into fuel. The Galactic Council forces followed standard doctrine, approaching the system at moderate speed with shields raised and weapons charging. They expected to enter scanning range, assess the enemy strength, and then engage in a calculated battle of attrition. The human fleet had other ideas. The moment they entered the system, they accelerated to combat speed and split into 3 separate attack groups. Each group consisted of a mix of destroyers, frigates, and smaller attack craft, all moving with choreographed precision. Captain Chen led Alpha Group in a direct assault on the nearest hive ship. The Velcrin responded immediately, launching swarms of fighter organisms and charging their dissolution beams. The alien commanders watching from their ships expected to see the humans slow down, to adopt defensive formations. Instead, the human ships accelerated even faster. They wove through the Velcrin fighter swarms like dancers, their point defense systems firing continuously. But it wasn't just the flying that impressed the observers. It was the weapons. Humanity had brought kinetic weapons to a fight dominated by energy beams and plasma torpedoes. Magnetic accelerators launched projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Missile pods released hundreds of self-guided warheads. And most devastating of all, the humans had rediscovered and perfected an ancient concept: nuclear weapons. The first human strike hit the Velcrin hive ship with the force of a small star going supernova. 50 nuclear warheads detonated simultaneously along the creature's hull, overwhelming its biological defenses. The ship didn't die immediately, but it was crippled, its regeneration systems struggling to cope with radiation damage on a massive scale. "All ships, focus fire on the wounded target." Admiral Park's voice cut through the chaos of battle. "Hit it again before it can recover." This was another human trait that the galaxy was witnessing. Humans didn't fight fair. They didn't engage in honorable single combat or measured exchanges of fire. They swarmed, they overwhelmed, they went for the throat and didn't let go until their enemy stopped moving. The second wave of attacks finished what the first had started. The Velcrin hive ship broke apart, its biological components unable to maintain cohesion. The remaining 2 hive ships tried to retreat, but the human fleet had positioned blocking forces specifically to prevent that. Beta and Gamma groups closed in from different angles, launching their own devastating volleys. The battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, all 3 Velcrin hive ships were destroyed, and the human fleet had suffered only moderate casualties. The Galactic Council forces, which had been held in reserve following human request, watched in stunned silence. Commander Telleth opened a channel to Admiral Park. "How did you know that would work? The Velcrin have adapted to every tactic we've used against them." "Because we studied your tactics," Park replied. "You fight to minimize casualties and preserve resources. Those are good goals in most wars. But the Velkrin aren't most enemies. They're an existential threat. So we're fighting the way humans fight when our survival is on the line. We don't stop until the threat is eliminated. The liberation of Thraxis 4 was just the beginning. Over the next 4 months, the human fleet led a series of aggressive campaigns into Velkrin-controlled space. Each battle showcased different aspects of humanity's approach to warfare. They used psychological tactics, broadcasting sounds and images that unsettled the Velkrin hive mind. They employed combined arms tactics that other species had considered too complex to coordinate. They adapted to enemy responses with frightening speed, changing strategies mid-battle when necessary. But more than tactics or weapons, it was the human spirit that began to make the difference. Where other species saw impossible odds, humans saw a challenge. Where other species retreated to regroup, humans pressed forward. They had a saying that began to spread among the alien forces: humans don't know when to quit. Sarah Chen stood in the wreckage of a Velkrin forward base, her combat armor scarred from weeks of continuous fighting. Around her, a mixed force of human marines and Korean warriors secured the perimeter. The Koreans, initially skeptical of fighting alongside humans, had developed a respect for their small, determined allies. "Your people fight like they have nothing to lose," a Korean warrior named Kethex observed, his forearms managing weapons with practiced ease. "It is both inspiring and concerning." Sarah smiled grimly. "We fight like we have everything to lose: our homeworld, our families, our future. The Velkrin want to take all of that away. We're not going to let them." She looked up at the alien sky, where human and alien ships continued to patrol. "Besides, Earth taught us a long time ago that the universe doesn't care about fair. You either survive or you don't. We've chosen to survive." The war ground on, and with each passing week, humanity's role in the conflict grew. The Galactic Council fleet still outnumbered human forces significantly, but it was the human battle groups that led every major offensive. Other species began to adopt human tactics, integrating kinetic weapons and aggressive maneuvering into their own doctrines. Admiral Park established his headquarters on a reclaimed colony world, coordinating operations across multiple sectors. His command center was a study in controlled chaos, with officers from a dozen different species working alongside humans. The language barriers had been overcome through technology, but cultural differences remained. "The Council is requesting we slow our advance," his aide informed him. "They're concerned about overextending our supply lines." Park studied the strategic map hovering above his command table. The Velkrin had been pushed back across a dozen systems, but their core territory remained intact. Intelligence suggested they were gathering their forces for a massive counterattack. "Tell the Council that we're not slowing down," he decided. "The Velkrin are predators. They understand strength and aggression. If we hesitate, if we show weakness, they'll exploit it. We keep pushing until we find their homeworld, or whatever serves as their central command. Then we burn it to ash." His words would have shocked the Council members 6 months ago. Now, they simply nodded and implemented his orders. Humanity had proven their methods worked. The Velkrin were being driven back for the first time since their invasion began. But the humans were also learning about their enemy. The Velkrin weren't mindless monsters. They were intelligent, adaptive, and utterly dedicated to their survival at the expense of all other life. In many ways, they were dark mirrors of humanity itself. Both species had clawed their way up from deadly homeworlds. Both had developed aggressive expansion strategies. The key difference was that humans had learned to cooperate with other species, while the Velkrin saw everything else as food. The turning point came in the Battle of the Shrouded Nebula, a massive engagement that would be studied by military strategists for generations. The Velkrin had assembled the largest fleet seen since the war began, more than 3,000 hive ships of various sizes, all converging on a strategic nexus point that would give them access to the inner systems of the galaxy. The combined Galactic Council and human forces numbered less than half that. Standard military doctrine suggested a fighting retreat, forcing the Velcrin to advance through multiple defensive lines. Admiral Park proposed something different. "We're going to ambush them inside the nebula itself," he announced at the strategy meeting. "The dense gases will interfere with sensors on both sides, but we've trained for combat in low visibility conditions. The Velcrin haven't." The alien commanders exchanged uncertain looks. Elder Vrix spoke for many when he asked, "You propose to intentionally blind yourselves and trust that you can operate more effectively than the enemy?" "Yes," Park said simply, "because humans evolved as ambush predators. We hunted in forests and jungles where visibility was limited. We learned to use sound, movement, and coordination to take down prey much larger than ourselves. The nebula isn't that different from the environments that shaped us." The plan was audacious and dangerous, but the alternatives were worse. The Council approved the strategy, and the fleet moved into position. Human ships led the advance into the nebula, their crews calm despite the sensor interference that would have panicked most species. The Velcrin fleet entered the nebula in a standard formation, expecting to push through any resistance with overwhelming numbers. They never saw the attack coming until it was too late. Human ships emerged from the dense gas clouds at close range, launching their weapons before the Velcrin could respond. Nuclear weapons detonated in the confined space of the nebula, their effects magnified by the reactive gases. Kinetic rounds punched through hive ship hulls with devastating precision. But the true innovation was in the coordination. Human commanders had developed a new communication system using tight beam transmissions that could penetrate the nebula interference. Every ship in the human fleet knew exactly where every other ship was, allowing them to execute complex maneuvers without visual contact. They flowed through the battle space like a school of fish, each individual part of a greater whole. The Velcrin, by contrast, lost cohesion almost immediately. Their hive-mind communication was disrupted by the nebula, forcing individual ships to fight independently. They were still dangerous, but they had lost their greatest advantage. The battle raged for 18 hours. When it was over, the Velcrin fleet had been shattered, more than 2,000 hive ships destroyed or crippled. The survivors fled into deep space, their formation broken and their momentum halted. The Allied fleet had suffered significant casualties as well, but they had won a decisive victory. The Velcrin advance had been stopped. Now it was time to take the war to the enemy. The victory at the Shrouded Nebula marked the beginning of the end for the Velcrin invasion. The psychological impact was immense. The seemingly unstoppable hive fleet had been broken by a combination of Council resources and human tactics. More importantly, the Velcrin had learned something they had never encountered before: fear. The Velcrin had conquered dozens of species, but none of those species had been true predators. They had all been herbivores or scavengers, species that had evolved to flee from danger rather than confront it. Humanity was different. Humans chased down their prey. They worked together to bring down threats too large for any individual. And most terrifying of all, they didn't stop when they had the advantage. They pressed until the enemy was completely destroyed. Captain Chen was promoted to Commodore and given command of a strike force dedicated to hunting down Velcrin remnants. Her fleet consisted of 30 ships, a mix of human destroyers and alien support vessels. They operated deep behind what had been Velcrin lines, searching for hidden bases and hive ships that had escaped the major battles. It was dangerous work. The Velcrin were adapting, learning to hide, setting traps, but the humans adapted faster. They used drones to scout ahead. They analyzed patterns in Velcrin behavior. They even began to predict where the enemy would hide based on psychological profiles built from captured intelligence. "Contact, bearing 27 Mark V, her tactical officer announced. "Single hive ship, medium class. It's trying to power down its systems, probably hoping we'll pass by." Sarah studied the sensor data. The Velcrin ship was tucked into an asteroid cluster, attempting to mimic the background radiation. It was actually a decent hiding spot. Most species would have missed it. "Launch a full spread of penetrator missiles," she ordered. "Target the densest part of the asteroid cluster. If they want to hide in the rocks, we'll use the rocks against them." The missiles slammed into the asteroids, fragmenting them into thousands of high-velocity projectiles. The Velcrin hive ship, suddenly exposed and damaged by asteroid impacts, tried to flee. It didn't make it far. Sarah's fleet closed in and finished it with brutal efficiency. This pattern repeated across multiple sectors. Human-led strike forces hunted down Velcrin ships one by one. There was no mercy, no quarter given. The Velcrin had shown the galaxy what total war looked like. Now humanity was teaching them the consequences. Back on Earth, the war effort had transformed society. Factories that once produced consumer goods now churned out weapons and ship components. The entire species had mobilized in a way not seen since the ancient world wars. But there was a difference this time. Humanity wasn't fighting itself. They had a clear external enemy, and they were united in their determination to eliminate the threat. Professor Elena Rodriguez addressed the United Nations Assembly, her presentation broadcast across the solar system. She was one of Earth's leading xenobiologists, and she had been studying captured Velcrin organisms for months. "We've learned something crucial about the enemy," she explained, holographic displays showing cellular structures and biological processes. "The Velcrin aren't just aggressive, they're biologically incapable of coexistence. Their entire physiology is built around consuming and converting other life forms. They can't eat synthesized food. They can't adapt to a peaceful existence. They are, in the most literal sense, a species that can only survive through the destruction of others." The implications were clear. This wasn't a war that could end in negotiation or compromise. The Velcrin would continue attacking until they were destroyed or until they had consumed everything else in the galaxy. There was no middle ground. Admiral Park received the intelligence report from Earth and incorporated it into his strategic planning. If the Velcrin couldn't coexist with other species, then the only way to end the war was to eliminate them completely. It was a harsh calculus, but Park was a military man. He understood that sometimes harsh measures were necessary. "We've located their primary breeding worlds," he announced at the High Command meeting. 3 systems in the galactic south, heavily defended. Intelligence suggests that's where they're rebuilding their fleet strength. Elder Vrix's crystalline form pulsed with concern. "You're proposing to attack their core worlds directly? The casualties would be enormous." "Yes, they would be," Park agreed, "if we did it the conventional way. But I'm not proposing a conventional attack. I'm proposing we use humanity's oldest and most effective weapon, fire." He brought up technical schematics on the display. "These are stellar igniters. We developed them for terraforming operations, using them to trigger fusion reactions in gas giant atmospheres. But they can be modified. If we detonate them in the atmospheres of the Velcrin breeding worlds, the entire planets will burn. Nothing will survive." The chamber fell silent. What Park was describing was planetary genocide, the deliberate extermination of an entire species. It violated every principle of civilized warfare that the Galactic Council had established over thousands of years. Commander Teleth spoke carefully. "Admiral, what you're suggesting is something we have never done. Even in our darkest wars, we have never deliberately destroyed entire worlds." "I know," Park said, "and that's why you've been fighting the Velcrin for a year with limited success. You're trying to fight an existential threat with civilized rules. The Velcrin don't follow rules. They don't take prisoners. They don't leave survivors. They consume everything in their path." He looked around the table at the assembled leaders. "I understand if you can't support this action. The Galactic Council has principles, and those principles are important. But humanity has a principle too: survival. If we have to become monsters to defeat monsters, we will. And we'll carry that burden so the rest of the galaxy doesn't have to." The debate that followed lasted for hours. Some council members argued passionately against the plan. Others, particularly those whose worlds had been devastated by Velcrin attacks, supported it. In the end, the vote was split, with a narrow majority against using the stellar igniters. Admiral Park accepted the decision calmly. Then he made an announcement that stunned the council. Very well, the Galactic Council will not participate in this operation, but humanity will proceed alone. We didn't ask permission to join this war, and we're not asking permission to end it. The implications were clear. Humanity was willing to act unilaterally, to take on the moral burden of genocide if it meant protecting the galaxy from the Velcrin threat. It was a statement of both determination and independence that resonated across known space. In the end, cooler heads prevailed with a compromise. The stellar igniters would be used, but only after evacuation attempts were made to give any potentially peaceful Velcrin individuals a chance to surrender. It was a token gesture, given that the Velcrin had shown no signs of wanting peace, but it allowed the council members to maintain their principles. The assault on the Velcrin breeding worlds was the largest military operation in galactic history. More than 1,000 ships participated, with human forces making up nearly half that number. Captain Chen commanded one of the attack groups, her fleet assigned to breach the outer defenses of the primary breeding world. The Velcrin fought with desperate ferocity. They knew what was at stake. Their entire species would live or die based on the outcome of this battle. They threw everything they had at the attacking fleet, waves of hive ships and fighter organisms that seemed endless. But humanity had learned much over the course of the war. They had studied Velcrin tactics, identified their patterns, found their weaknesses, and they had shared that knowledge with their alien allies. The combined fleet fought with a coordination that would have been impossible at the start of the war. Sarah watched from her bridge as the battle unfolded. Her ship shook from near misses, and casualty reports came in from across the fleet. But they were winning. Slowly, inexorably, the Allied forces pushed through the Velcrin defenses. "All ships, this is Admiral Park." The transmission came through on all channels. "The path is clear. Deploying stellar igniters now." On her view screen, Sarah saw the weapons being launched toward the planet below. They were massive cylindrical devices, each one carrying enough fusion material to ignite an atmosphere. She thought about the Velcrin civilians on that world, if such a concept even applied to a hive species. She thought about the moral weight of what they were doing. Then she thought about Thraxis 4, where the Velcrin had been processing entire cities into biological fuel. She thought about the 47 conquered systems, the billions of beings who had been consumed. She thought about Earth and what would happen if the Velcrin ever reached her homeworld. The stellar igniters detonated simultaneously. The planet's atmosphere ignited in a chain reaction, temperatures soaring to levels that no biological organism could survive. The Velcrin breeding world burned, and with it, any hope the species had of rebuilding their numbers. The same scene played out at the other two breeding worlds. Within a day, the Velcrin's ability to reproduce had been eliminated. The war wasn't over, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. The surviving Velcrin forces fought on for another 3 months, but without their breeding worlds, they had no future. They began to lose cohesion, individual hive ships breaking off from the main forces. Some fled into unexplored space, seeking anywhere they might rebuild. Others fought suicidal last stands, taking as many enemies with them as possible. Humanity led the pursuit, hunting down Velcrin remnants with relentless efficiency. The Galactic Council forces participated, but they had lost their stomach for total war. They were content to let the humans finish what they had started. Captain Sarah Chen was present at the final battle of the war. A single Velcrin hive ship, one of the original invasion force, had been cornered in an empty system near the galactic rim. It could have fled into intergalactic space, but instead, it turned to fight. "They want to die with honor," Commander Kethex observed. He had been assigned to Sarah's ship as a liaison officer, and they had developed a strong working relationship. "It is something I understand," Sarah nodded. Every species deserves that much, even the monsters. The battle was brief. The Velquin ship fought well, but it was alone against an entire fleet. When it was destroyed, Sarah felt no triumph, only exhaustion and relief. The war was over. The journey back to Council Space took 2 weeks. During that time, Sarah had a lot to think about. Humanity had proven itself in the crucible of galactic war. They had shown themselves to be fierce warriors, brilliant tacticians, and above all, survivors who would do whatever was necessary to protect their own. But she also thought about the cost. Millions of humans had died in the war. Entire fleets had been lost, and they had committed genocide, even if it was against a species that would have done the same to them. That weight would stay with humanity for generations. The victory celebration on Athenor Prime was a subdued affair. The galactic community was grateful to be free of the Velcrin threat, but the methods used to achieve that freedom had made many uncomfortable. Humanity had saved the galaxy, but they had also frightened it. Admiral Park stood before the Galactic Council to receive formal recognition for humanity's role in the war. Elder Vrix spoke for the Assembly. Humanity has proven itself to be a species of exceptional capability and determination. You have shown us tactics and strategies we had never conceived. You have demonstrated a level of aggression and persistence that we find both admirable and concerning. Park nodded, understanding the subtext. The galaxy was grateful, but also wary. Humanity had proven they could be dangerous allies. What would happen if they ever became enemies? The human species evolved on a world that tried to kill us at every turn, Park said carefully. We learned to fight because we had to. We learned to work together because alone we couldn't survive. And we learned to never give up because giving up meant extinction. He looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. The Velcrin were a threat to all life in the galaxy. We did what was necessary to stop them. We don't apologize for that. But we also don't seek to dominate or conquer. We simply want to live, to grow, and to be part of this galactic community. The council deliberated for hours behind closed doors. When they reconvened, Elder Vrix announced their decision. Humanity will be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Your military forces will be recognized as the primary defense force for the galaxy, subject to council oversight, and humanity will be given representation in all major decisions affecting the galactic community. It was more than humanity had dared hope for when they first joined the galaxy 50 years ago. They had gone from newcomers to leaders through trial by fire. In the weeks that followed, Sarah Chen returned to Earth for the first time in 2 years. She stood in a park in New York City, watching children play and couples walk hand in hand. Normal life had resumed, though the war memorials being constructed around the world ensured no one would forget the cost. James Wilson found her there, looking up at the sky. "Strange to think it's over," he said. "Is it?" Sarah asked. "The Velcrin are gone, but the galaxy is a big place. There could be other threats out there. Other species that see us as prey rather than partners. Then we'll deal with them the same way we dealt with the Velcrin," James said confidently. "Humanity doesn't know how to quit." Sarah smiled at that. It was true. For better or worse, humanity had proven itself to be the galaxy's apex predator. They had shown that when pushed to the edge, they would fight with every weapon at their disposal. They would adapt, overcome, and ultimately prevail. The galaxy would have to learn to live with that fact, and humanity would have to learn to live with the responsibility that came with being the species others called when they needed monsters fought with monstrous methods. It wasn't the role they would have chosen, but it was the role they had earned. In the Galactic Council chambers, discussions had already begun about future threats and defense strategies. Human military advisors were in high demand, teaching other species the tactics that had proven so effective against the Velcrin. Some embraced these new methods enthusiastically. Others resisted, uncomfortable with the aggressive nature of human warfare. Admiral Park had retired from active military service, but he remained as an advisor to the Council's Defense Committee. He spent his days reviewing reports from the frontier, watching for any signs of new threats. The galaxy was at peace for now, but he knew better than to assume that peace would last forever. Professor Rodriguez continued her research, now with access to specimens and data from dozens of different species. She was working on a comprehensive study of predator species and their role in galactic ecosystems. The working title of her research was Apex Status: Why Predators Make Better Allies Than Prey. The Velcrin had been defeated, their species reduced to scattered individuals hiding in the dark spaces between stars. Some argued that humanity should hunt down even these remnants, ensuring complete extermination. Others believed enough blood had been shed. The debate continued with no easy answers. But one thing was certain: the galaxy had changed. Humanity had proven that being the newest species didn't mean being the weakest. They had shown that determination and adaptability could overcome size and numbers. They had demonstrated that sometimes the only way to defeat a monster was to become something monsters feared. Earth's history was written in blood, as Admiral Park had said. But from that bloody history had emerged a species capable of defending not just themselves, but an entire galaxy. The Velcrin War had been the test. Humanity had passed, though the scars would remain forever. As Sarah stood in that park, watching the peaceful scene around her, she understood something fundamental about her species. They were capable of terrible things when threatened. They could be ruthless, uncompromising, absolutely savage in pursuit of survival. But they were also capable of sacrifice, compassion, and incredible acts of courage. The galaxy had called humanity the apex predator, and perhaps that was true. But predators existed to maintain balance in the ecosystem. They culled the weak and controlled the dangerous. In its own way, humanity's role as the galaxy's premier warrior species was a form of service. Time would tell if the galaxy had been wise to embrace humanity's methods. Time would tell if the species that had clawed its way up from a deadly world could be trusted with the responsibility of defending civilized space. But for now, the war was over, and humanity could rest. The stars shone down on Earth, each one representing a world full of alien life, alien cultures, alien dreams. And somewhere among those stars, other threats might lurk, waiting for their chance. When they came, they would find humanity ready. They would find a species that had learned the hardest lessons of survival. They would find the galaxy's apex predator, and they would learn why even monsters should fear the darkness when humans hunted there. The Velcrin had been the first test. They would not be the last. But whatever came next, the galaxy now knew one essential truth: humanity could be counted on to fight. They would fight smart, they would fight dirty, and they would fight until there was nothing left to fight. In a universe full of dangers, that made them the most valuable allies anyone could ask for. It also made them the most terrifying enemies anyone could imagine. The galaxy had made its choice in accepting humanity. Now everyone would live with the consequences of that choice, for better or worse, for as long as humans walked among the stars.